When you feel broken, the first thing you must understand is this: brokenness is not the end of your story. Brokenness is often the beginning of your discovery. Most people in this room have experienced moments when life pressed you so hard that you felt like something inside of you shattered. Maybe it was a betrayal. Maybe it was a failure. Maybe it was the loss of something you thought you could never live without. And in that moment, you looked at yourself and said, I don't know if I can recover from this, but let me tell you something powerful tonight. The greatest danger in life is not being broken. The greatest danger is believing that because you are broken, you are finished. Brokenness does not mean you are useless. Brokenness does not mean you have lost your value. Brokenness simply means you have encountered pressure, and pressure reveals things. You see, nothing great in life is produced without pressure. Diamonds are created under pressure. Gold is purified by fire. Seeds break open in the darkness of the soil before they grow into trees. Even a child enters the world through pressure. So when life begins to press you, it may feel like destruction, but often it is preparation. The problem is that when we feel broken, we start believing lies about ourselves. We begin to think that our mistakes define us. We begin to think our failures disqualify us. We begin to think that our past has more power than our future. But listen carefully. Your value does not decrease because of damage. $100 bill is still worth $100, even if it is crumpled, stepped on, or dropped in the dirt. The condition changed, but the value did not. And many of you in this room have allowed your condition to convince you that your value has changed. It hasn't. Broken relationships do not reduce your worth. Broken dreams do not cancel your purpose. Broken moments do not erase your potential. The tragedy is not that people are broken. The tragedy is that people believe their brokenness is their identity. But brokenness is not your identity. It is an experience, and experiences are teachers. Sometimes life allows things to break so that something greater can be built. Sometimes the old version of you has to collapse so the real version of you can emerge. Think about a seed. If you look at a seed before it grows, it looks complete. It looks intact. But if the seed refuses to break open, it will never become a tree. Inside that seed is a forest. Inside that seed is shade for generations. Inside that seed are thousands of other seeds. But none of it can appear until the shell breaks. And some of you are angry because your shell broke. You're angry because the job ended. You're angry because the relationship fell apart. You're angry because the plan didn't work. But what if that break was not destruction? What if that break was the moment your potential was being released? You see, when everything is comfortable, we rarely grow. Comfort has never produced greatness. Ease has never built champions. Convenience has never created history. Growth requires disruption. And disruption often feels like brokenness. But here is another truth you must understand. When something breaks, it reveals what it was made of. Pressure exposes weakness, but it also reveals strength you didn't know you had. Some of you survived things that should have destroyed you. You went through seasons where you cried yourself to sleep. Seasons where you questioned everything. Seasons where you felt abandoned, confused, and exhausted, and yet you are still here. That means something inside you refused to die. There is a resilience inside every human being that is far greater than we realize. The human spirit has an incredible ability to rebuild, to recover, and to rise again. But the key to rising again is understanding that your past is a reference point, not a residence that too many people live in yesterday. They replay old failures in their mind. They rehearse old disappointments. They carry wounds like permanent labels. But if you keep living in the place where you were broken, you will never walk into the place where you are restored. You cannot drive forward while staring into the rearview mirror. You must learn to release what has already happened. That does not mean pretending it didn't hurt. It does not mean denying the pain. It means refusing to allow the pain to control the rest of your life. Pain can either imprison you or instruct you. The choice is yours. Every painful experience carries a lesson. Every setback carries information. Every loss contains wisdom. But many people are so focused on the wound that they never discover the wisdom. Let me tell you something. Some of the strongest people in the world are people who were once completely shattered. Because when you rebuild yourself, you rebuild with knowledge. You rebuild with awareness. You rebuild with strength. There is a kind of power that only comes after brokenness, a clarity that only comes after loss, a courage that only comes after fear. And once you discover that you can survive being broken, you stop being afraid of challenges. Because you realize something powerful. If I survive that, I can survive anything. You see, fear loses its power when you discover your resilience. But here is where many people make a mistake. When they feel broken, they isolate themselves, they withdraw, they shut down. They begin to believe that they must carry everything alone. But isolation magnifies pain. Human beings were not designed to heal alone. Healing often requires connection, encouragement, and truth spoken by people who refuse to let you give up on yourself. Sometimes when you feel broken, you need someone to remind you of who you are. Because pain can distort your vision. Pain can make you forget your strength. Pain can make you forget your purpose. Pain can make you forget how far you've already come. But your story is bigger than your worst moment. You are more than the mistake you made. You are more than the disappointment you experienced. You are more than the rejection you faced. Inside every human being is potential that has not yet been discovered. Potential is powerful because it is not based on what you have already done. It is based on what you are capable of becoming. And potential often awakens in moments when everything seems to be falling apart. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in history came from people who were told they had failed, inventors who were laughed at, leaders who were rejected, visionaries who were misunderstood. If those people had allowed broken moments to define them, the world would have never seen their greatness. but they made a decision. They decided that failure would not be final. They decided that pain would not be permanent. They decided that brokenness would not be their ending. And that decision changed everything. Because the moment you decide that you will rise again, you activate something powerful inside your mind. Hope. Hope is not just a feeling. Hope is fuel. Hope is the energy that allows human beings to move forward even when circumstances look impossible. Hope is what tells you that tomorrow can be better than today. And once hope enters your heart, brokenness begins to lose its grip on your life. But hope must be protected. You cannot surround yourself with voices that constantly remind you of your failures. You cannot keep environments that feed your fears and starve your faith in yourself. Your environment influences your recovery. If you plant a healthy seed in toxic soil, the seed struggles to grow. But when the environment is right, growth becomes natural. That is why you must guard your mind. Guard what you listen to. Guard what you believe. Guard the thoughts you allow to live inside your head. Because the greatest battles in life are fought in the mind. If your mind believes you are finished, your life will reflect that belief. But if your mind believes you can rebuild, your life will begin moving in that direction. You must begin to see yourself beyond the broken pieces. Imagine a master sculptor standing in front of a block of stone. To everyone else, it just looks like a rough rock. But the sculptor sees a masterpiece inside it. And with every strike of the hammer, pieces fall away. To someone watching, it might look like destruction. It might look like damage. But the sculptor knows something they don't know. Every strike is revealing the masterpiece. Sometimes life works the same way. What feels like pieces falling apart may actually be pieces falling into place. What feels like loss may actually be preparation. What feels like the end may actually be the beginning of the most powerful chapter of your life. But you must be willing to stand up again. You must be willing to rebuild again. You must be willing to believe again. Because brokenness only becomes permanent when you stop trying. And as long as you are breathing, your story is not over. There is still time for growth. Still time for healing. Still time for transformation. You may feel cracked, but you are not canceled. You may feel wounded, but you are not worthless. You may feel shattered, but you are not finished. The human spirit has an incredible ability to rise from ruins. History is filled with stories of people who were once dismissed, rejected, and underestimated. But they refused to stay down, and the same power exists inside you. The question is not whether life will break you at some point. Life breaks everyone at some point. The real question is what you will do after the break. Will you allow it to define you? Or will you allow it to refine you? Because brokenness can either become a prison or a platform. It can trap you in bitterness, or it can launch you into wisdom. It can make you smaller, or it can make you stronger. And the difference lies in your response. So if you feel broken tonight, hear this clearly. Your brokenness is not your burial. It is your awakening. The pieces of your life are not scattered without purpose. They are the raw materials for your comeback, and the world has not yet seen what you are capable of becoming. So stand up again, believe again, build again, because sometimes the most powerful people in the world are not the ones who were never broken. They are the ones who were broken and chose to rise anyway. There are moments in life when everything you built, everything you believed in, and everything you expected suddenly collapses. In those moments, it feels like the ground beneath you disappears. The plans you trusted fail. The doors you expected to open remain closed. The people you believed would stay sometimes walk away. And standing in that place, surrounded by disappointment and uncertainty, it feels like you have reached the end. But what many people call an ending is often only the dismantling of a path that was never meant to carry them to their destiny. You see, we often design our lives around comfort, approval, and security. We choose the safe path. We choose the familiar road. We choose the direction that seems predictable and stable. But purpose rarely grows in comfortable places. Purpose grows in places where certainty is removed. Sometimes life must interrupt your plans in order to reveal a purpose that is far greater than the one you designed for yourself. Many people misunderstand purpose. They think purpose is simply a career or a job title. They think purpose is something they achieve when everything is going well. But purpose is not built in perfect conditions. Purpose is usually discovered in disruption. It is discovered in the moments when the life you thought you were supposed to live suddenly changes direction. It is discovered when the old structure falls apart and forces you to ask deeper questions about who you are and why you are here. When everything is stable, we rarely question our direction. We continue moving forward even if we are moving towards something that does not truly align with who we are meant to be. But when life shakes you, when the familiar patterns break, when the structure collapses, something powerful happens inside the human mind. You begin to search. You begin to ask questions you never asked before. You begin to explore possibilities you never considered before. And in that search, something begins to awaken. Think about how many people discover their greatest calling only after experiencing what looked like the worst moment of their life. A person loses a job and feels like their world has ended. Yet that loss pushes them to start something they would have never dared to attempt before. And that new path becomes the place where their gifts finally come alive. Someone goes through a painful experience that leaves them feeling shattered. Yet that same pain later becomes the source of compassion that allows them to help thousands of others who are suffering in the same way. Someone experiences rejection that feels humiliating and discouraging. Yet that rejection redirects them toward a path that leads to influence, leadership, and impact they never imagined. But in the moment of loss, none of that is visible. In the moment of collapse, all you see is what disappeared. The human mind naturally focuses on what was lost rather than what could be created. When something ends, our attention is drawn to the emptiness it leaves behind. But emptiness is not always negative. Sometimes emptiness is space, and space is necessary for something new to grow. If your life is completely filled with the wrong direction, the right direction has no room to appear. If your schedule, your thinking, and your identity are built around a path that does not lead to your purpose, then life must sometimes clear that space. That clearing process can feel painful. It can feel confusing. It can feel like destruction. But in many cases, it is actually preparation. The difficulty is that we judge our lives based on the present moment, while purpose unfolds across a much larger timeline. When you are standing in the middle of a storm, it is difficult to believe that the storm will pass. When you are walking through uncertainty, it is difficult to imagine clarity. But the human story is filled with examples of people who stood in moments that looked like absolute endings, only to discover later that those moments were the turning point that led them into their true direction. Sometimes a door must close because you would have stayed behind it forever. Sometimes a plan must fail because it was limiting your potential. Sometimes an identity must collapse because it was too small for the life you were meant to live. Human beings often attach their identity to what they do. We define ourselves by our roles, our titles, our achievements, and our relationships. And when those things disappear, it feels like we have lost ourselves. But who you are is far greater than the roles you have played. A role can end without your purpose ending. A position can disappear without your potential disappearing. A chapter can close without the story being finished. What many people call the end of their life is often just the end of a chapter they believed would last forever. And when that chapter ends, the silence that follows can feel overwhelming. Because when the noise of the old life stops, you are left alone with questions. Questions about direction. Questions about identity. Questions about meaning. Those questions can feel uncomfortable, but they are often the doorway to self-discovery. Self-discovery rarely happens when life is easy. It happens when life forces you to confront yourself. When everything is stripped away, you begin to see yourself without the labels. You begin to recognize strengths that were hidden. You begin to recognize desires that were buried. You begin to recognize abilities that were ignored because you were too busy living according to someone else's expectations. Many people spend years walking a path that was designed by other people's opinions. They pursue careers because it is expected. They follow traditions because it is familiar. They stay in environments because it is comfortable. But purpose does not respond to expectation. Purpose responds to authenticity, and authenticity often emerges when the life you were performing suddenly stops working. When the performance ends, the real person finally has room to appear. There are moments when life removes the mask. And when that happens, you are confronted with a powerful choice. You can try to rebuild the same life that just collapsed. Or you can begin exploring the deeper reason you exist. Many people rush to rebuild what they lost because uncertainty is uncomfortable. They want things to return to normal as quickly as possible. But sometimes returning to normal means returning to the same path that was preventing your growth. Sometimes the interruption in your life is actually an invitation to rethink everything, to reconsider what matters, to reevaluate what truly fulfills you, to discover what you are capable of contributing to the world. Purpose is not something that appears instantly. Purpose unfolds as you learn, grow, experiment, and explore the abilities that already exist inside you. Every human being carries gifts. Not everyone discovers them immediately. Sometimes those gifts remain hidden until life pushes you into situations where you must use them. A person may never realize their leadership ability until they are forced to step forward during a crisis. A person may never recognize their creativity until the path they were following disappears, and they must create something new. A person may never discover their voice until they experience something that compels them to speak. When life feels like it has ended, what is actually happening is that the old structure that contained your life is gone. And without that structure, you are free to rebuild in a completely different way. Freedom can feel frightening because freedom requires responsibility. It requires courage. It requires vision. It requires the willingness to step into the unknown without guarantees. But the unknown is often where purpose lies. Purpose rarely reveals itself to people who refuse to move beyond familiarity. Purpose calls people into territory they have never explored before. And the path toward that territory often begins with a moment that feels like everything has fallen apart. Because when everything is stable, we remain where we are. When everything collapses, we are forced to move. Movement creates discovery. Discovery creates direction. Direction creates purpose. Many people who are now living meaningful lives can trace their journey back to a moment they once described as the worst day of their life. At the time, they felt devastated. They felt embarrassed. They felt confused. They believed they had reached the end. But looking back years later, they realized that moment was actually the turning point that redirected their entire life. The difficulty is that when you are standing in that moment, you cannot see the future yet. All you see is the wreckage. All you feel is the uncertainty. All you experience is the fear of what comes next. But inside every ending, there is an opening. Inside every collapse, there is an opportunity. Inside every disruption, there is a redirection waiting to be discovered. And the key is how you respond in that moment. If you interpret the ending as proof that your life is over, you will remain stuck in the past. But if you begin to see the ending as a transition, your mind begins to search for new possibilities. Perspective determines direction. Two people can experience the same ending and move in completely different directions. One person sees defeat. Another person sees a new beginning. One person becomes trapped by disappointment. Another person becomes motivated to explore new opportunities. The event may be the same, but the meaning assigned to the event determines the outcome. That is why your mindset is one of the most powerful forces shaping your life. If you believe that your life ended when that door closed, then you will stop searching for the doors that are waiting to open. But if you believe that something greater may still exist ahead, your mind remains open, and an open mind begins to notice opportunities that were invisible before. Purpose is often discovered when people start asking different questions. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" they begin asking, "What can I learn from this?" Instead of asking, "Why did my life fall apart?" they begin asking, "What new direction might this be pointing me toward?" Instead of asking, "What did I lose?" they begin asking, "What can I now build?" The quality of your questions shapes the direction of your life. And when you begin asking questions that focus on growth rather than defeat, something powerful begins to change inside your thinking. You begin to move from mourning what ended to exploring what could begin. You begin to see possibilities where you once saw only pain. You begin to recognize that your life still contains chapters that have not yet been written. And in that recognition, something begins to awaken: curiosity, courage, imagination. The realization that your future is not limited to the path you were previously walking. And once that realization appears, the idea that your life has ended begins to lose its power, because you start to understand that what you experienced was not the end of your life. It was the end of one direction. And the moment one direction ends, another direction becomes possible. Not everyone recognizes that moment. Some people remain standing in the ruins of what ended, waiting for it to return. But others begin gathering the pieces and building something entirely new. Those are the people who eventually discover their purpose. Not because their lives were easy, but because they refused to believe that an ending meant their story was finished. They understood that life sometimes closes one road because another road must be taken. And that new road may lead to a place they never imagined when they first began their journey.